Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this work session of the Washington County Board of Education. The board is meeting today with staff to discuss the 2022 Maryland legislative session. Colleagues, you should have received in your Friday packet resource materials that pertain to the 2022 legislative program. So those provided materials include a copy of Policy BJ, School Board Legislative Program, the WCBOE's calendar for the 2022 legislative session, the proposed 2022 legislative program, that's a document, and something that you received today, the student member voting rights document. Does everyone have what they need by way of resource materials? Okay. So we'll begin the discussion with our identification of core values for the upcoming legislative session. In policy, we have a definition for core values, if you want to refer to that. It's 3, the only definition under Roman numeral 3. Legislative core values are the guiding principles adopted by the Board of Education that serve to inform the school community of the board's fundamental beliefs and its legislative plan of action to advance the education of students and to improve the public school system. So you will see on the document 2022 legislative program core values listed as adequate and equitable local and state funding. And there are bulleted items that appear there. So with regard to that core value, we would be looking at equity and funding. We would be looking at pre-kindergarten education funding. We would be looking at maintenance of effort. We would be looking at adequate and equitable state funding to improve school buildings and to create capacity. Any questions or concerns regarding core values?
Yeah, I have a concern about the maintenance of effort. I know when we have buildings as old as we have and other costs such as required increases to teacher salary, we're going to need more money to be able to adequately fund our budget. But when we look at any growth in maintenance of effort during a time of high inflation, which could become hyperinflation, that could potentially require the County Board of Commissioners to increase taxes, which obviously would have a pretty adverse impact on the community, as a whole. So obviously we're starting to get some local wage growth and things are looking pretty good as far as the wage growth goes. But when we start looking at the pace of inflation compared to the pace of wage growth, and then we could potentially require increase in taxes by the county commissioners to fund our budget, because we know that just because we asked for an increase next year, we also know that there will be a bigger increase the following year. So I do have a concern at this time for anything that would require more education at the local level during periods of high inflation like we're seeing.
Can I ask a question?
Yes,
Are you saying that you don't want us to ask for anything over maintenance of effort?
I'm not necessarily saying that. I'm saying anything that would grow the required maintenance of effort. If we need something, we need something. Like I said, I understand. We have
Well,
very.
give me an example of what you're talking about. What should we not grow?
I'm saying what it's saying here is that the Board of Education of Washington County supports growth in local funding in addition to minimum maintenance of effort amounts. So I'm just saying that that's a concern of mine. I'm not necessarily saying one way or another, because I understand that we need to be able to fund the budget as far as our aging buildings go and requirements in teacher salaries. But I'm worried that this could go and be something that could eventually require the county to raise taxes during periods of inflation.
Right. Well, they did raise taxes for a year, and it didn't help us that much,
Right.
so.
I'm just, like I said, this is what, this is what I'm seeing here.
Okay, I
It's a
just wanted
concern of mine.
clarification. I understand, and I respect your opinion.
So are you suggesting that we not advocate and that we not support growth in local funding in addition to maintenance of effort?
Yeah, I don't want growth in maintenance of effort, and that's what I'm concerned about. So, like I said, I understand that we need to ask for more money than what the minimum is, but when we start looking at something that says something about any effort to reduce the level of school funding should be opposed, again, I don't want that, but it's, when we're talking about asking for more money and we know that the following year, we get that trickle-down effect, it's a concern of mine, and I think it's something that should be on our mind. So, like I said, I don't necessarily want that to be a core value. I think it's something that we should do, but to make that be a core value during this time is something that I'd be concerned about.
I'll ask the superintendent this, what is the precise change in maintenance of effort under the blueprint? Because it is affected.
Well, I mean, it's hard to say because we have more questions than we have answers, even though we're 3 years into the blueprint bill. It continues to change. What we think is going to happen is a lot of these things are going to come to us in buckets, for a lack of any other term, and they require local match in those buckets. I think what I've seen for Washington County gets off the hook, and they have very little investment in keeping up with the Kerwin part. I will just say this. They did raise taxes. They did come up with $18 million additional dollars, a substantial surplus. They gave us nothing above maintenance of effort. I don't know how else to describe it, but we gave a 1%, no step, a 1% raise to our staff 2 years ago. We gave a 1.25% raise to our staff last year, no step. People are missing this, no step. I just had this conversation with staff in the last couple of days, a little bit more today. We could be reaching a tipping point where we're going to have a serious, serious problem. ESP and teachers and administrators. We need the help of the county commissioners and the state to avoid that. Other jurisdictions are getting 10, 15, 25, 50 million over maintenance of effort. Now, some of these are big counties, but we need help. I don't want to take anything away from county employees, but they got their percentage increase as well as a step and got their last year's step made up mid-year. There was money for that in this county with county taxpaying dollars. Why aren't county school system employees viewed similarly? And there is a severe shortage coming already here in ESP. We're looking for a handful of teachers, and we're lucky that we don't have a significant number of openings. That's because of our starting wage. And we're continuously losing administrators. Now, wages is not going to fix everything, but we're in a high poverty county, high for, our makeup and community, and we have a lot to work on here. Every dollar the last 2 years, we cut from the budget to provide raises of 1% and 1.25% the last 2 years. We did not get as many new dollars as we put towards salary, and that's all we were able to give. This is a serious problem, folks. I'm a short timer here, a few years and I'm probably out of here. This is a serious, serious problem. This shortage is very, very real. Kerwin has got all kinds of things about more planning time and all those things, all of which I support for teachers. But that requires more teachers or larger class size. And it's going to need to be addressed. And we need partners in this. And I think the statement's very true. We cannot afford to lose maintenance of effort. I can't clearly answer the question, Mr. Stauffer. It just changes. I think it still exists. It just changes. The requirements of local funding matching up with state funding. Again, I would point to the inflation. All of our staff at a 1%, 1.25% raise for the last 2 years didn't keep up with inflation when it was 2% or 2.5%, let alone a 5% inflationary outlook. So we have to, at some point, the county commissioners need to get involved. This is their school system. We don't own the school system. We are just caretakers of it. This is a county school system. Belongs to the county commissioners as well as the school board as well as the citizens. And we need to address this. We'll have more on this in December when we look at the forecasting of the budgets. We're still waiting on some numbers to get finalized. Our English learner number needs to be finalized. Special ed number needs to be finalized. Our enrollment number needs to be finalized. But it would appear, based on what I understand from Kerwin, this year would be the last year for low effort to occur, and then that goes away. And that's the only thing that's been driving up maintenance of effort at all. We're going to be down in the number of students, so it's possible if the county doesn't want to support us, they could give us, reduced amount, not reduced amount per student, but reduced amounts just based on not having as many students. But I'm very concerned. As your superintendent, I am very concerned about staffing, very concerned. And I know money doesn't fix it all, but the cloud of COVID doesn't make things easy right now, and just a lot of things happening right now. A lot of good things are happening, and we want to continue that momentum. So this is the board decision what your core values are and things. I think it's up to the county to choose whether to give us more money, and they've continued to choose to not give us more money, and that's their decision. It's up to them to decide where they spend the money. They've obviously invested a lot of money in different places because their revenues have been substantially up the last couple of years. They've just chosen not to invest it here. And I'd like to be able to change that, but it's certainly up to them. It's a decision they make. I would request the board to continue to pursue for additional dollars. These other school systems that are getting additional money are going to outpace us and are outpacing us already.
Well, no formal action will be taken during this work session, so any changes to the core values would be done formally at the business meeting where we have as an action item the adoption of the legislative program. I would just like to say that if the board does not support growth in addition to minimum maintenance of effort, any additional money would come to us outside maintenance of effort, and that would not be money that we could be assured of and having in the future. So there's no way that we could use that additional money for things like salaries or ongoing expenses. It's a concern to me that our county is not investing in our school system, and when they finish the year with a surplus of $46 million, Mr. Stauffer is saying, and that money drops into their fund balance to be used for a rainy day, I think we're looking at days in Washington County Public Schools that is going to require the county to step up and fund above maintenance of effort.
Like I said, I understand we have our aging buildings. We definitely need funding for some of those things. But, like I said, when it's roughly half of every dollar that's taxed goes to the school system, again, say that's enough or not enough. I'm not trying to argue that. I'm just trying to think from the taxpayer standpoint. When they know that half of every one of their dollars is going to the school system, it's it might be tough for people to say, hey, you're low effort, and maybe that's just semantics when you talk about the title of it all, but I mean, like I said, as far as this goes, I worry about, and I'm not saying that anything in here is wrong, I just worry that if this is something we're pushing for, we already struggle with affordable housing in this county, and if landlords and property owners have to start raising rents due to higher taxes, it's a concern of mine as well. And I'm not trying to say that you're wrong. You're 100% right, Dr. Michael. I mean, it's tough to be competitive when the neighboring county is able to start their teachers out, and right now it's not 10,000 more, but just to throw a number out there, someone has similar experience can go and make significantly more money. I completely agree and understand. I'm not trying to argue against our need for money, but I just worry, like I said, all I'm saying is that I just worry about the timing of it all.
Thank you.
And I would just like to say, I guess back when I became a member, maybe a year or two before that, that the county kind of gave up paying for nurses, for buses,
Crossing guards, the
crossing
duty center.
guards. So that might be an avenue to revisit that would free up money instead of adding more programming on our end, having them to take that back. Because we all know that the resource officers are paid in many school systems, but not in ours.
22 other school systems, I believe.
22 out of 24. So we are the only school system that doesn't have our resource officers paid for. And that when we do have to pay that when they get a raise,
We pay it.
we have to pay that raise without us even, we don't even get to vote on that. It just has to happen. So things like that would be nice if they would take that back to free us up, and then we wouldn't have to be asking for more and more. But yet it would serve us, and that may be something that we should look at, in the next, year, because especially the resource officers, I mean, across the state, and we're the only county that's not being funded that, and we have to fund our own. I mean, and that's not to take anything from the sheriff's department, but, that's a big lift for us to do. And everybody wants their schools to be safe. We want resource officers there when they need it, and it would be nice if the county commissioners would take those items back, and that would help us out. So I kind of agree with Daryl, but yet I do want to make sure that we find ways to keep us, that we're not adding a lot of things to it, and we're looking for ways that we can give some of that back to the county, and they can fund that themselves, because they do have a lot of money sitting in a bank. So.
Thank you.
One last thing, I would advocate, I know we don't make a decision here, but I would advocate that we keep this as one of our core values. As board members, I think it's our job, our duty to advocate for adequate funding to run the schools of Washington County, Maryland. And I would just say this, as a taxpayer, not speaking as a board member right now, but as a taxpayer and a longtime citizen of this country, I remember when the county commissioners spent, I think, a couple $100,000 taking some trips to the Far East and so forth. And to me, that was a misuse of money, because nothing came to fruition out of those trips concerning the property up at Cascade, Fort Ritchie. So I think we need to keep this, when we do vote on our core values, as one of our core values.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to local control. Anything of concern under local control? We're looking at continued governance authority for local boards of education to set educational policy and school budgets. charter schools falls under this category. The local boards of education retain the sole authority to grant charters and to administer the funding to charters. And with voucher programs, we are opposed to any expansion of current voucher programs.
Could you explain a little further about the voucher program? I don't know much about that.
Well, there are current voucher programs. Mrs. Cade, did you want to say something?
Yes, over the past few years, the governor has included in his budget money for voucher programs, voucher funding for non-public schools. And it has been used fairly widely. It is, again, taking the public money and putting it in private schools, a concept which generally school systems oppose. And so each year, the Maryland Association of Boards of Education has stood in opposition to any funding for voucher programs. We believe that public money should be used in public education. And so that's been, I would say the past 3-4 years, probably, maybe longer, I can't remember, that there has been a voucher program, and it's been sneaking up a little bit each year, getting a little bit larger. And so again, it's a diverting public money into private schools, which is contrary to general public school philosophy.
And I personally would argue that the public funding for the public schools came from the private citizen, and if they would like to go to private school, like I said, I'm not saying that we'd foot the whole bill, but, voucher program, I know that in certain cases, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but some of those vouchers could be something like a student with a profound disability that wouldn't be able to be serviced at a public school might have that at a private school. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's something that voucher program might be used for. Is that accurate?
Well, no, this is much more for regular students in private schools. Children with profound disabilities, and again, your superintendent is very able to speak to all this, but they are normally within the public school funding, and there's additional funding granted for students in special education and with special needs, and in certain private placements even that are covered by public funds. So if the public schools cannot service a child, they are eligible for public funding into certain private institutions and schools. Am I correct, Mr. Superintendent?
I see a lot of heads nodding yes behind
Okay.
you, so I assume you are. But yeah, I mean, like I said, as far as I can tell, and, again, that's why there's 7 of us. I mean, voucher programs, again, the public funding for the public schools comes from the private citizen. So I don't see any issue with expansion within reason to the voucher program, and I personally would like to see that removed. Now, obviously, no formal action being taken,
Correct.
but
Correct.
So you're saying that if a citizen wants to send his or her child to a private school, then money out of the public educational budget should be used to pay for that expense.
I wouldn't be opposed to that.
You can't support 2 school systems in this country. That's why we have a public school system. That's why public school systems were formed, especially the one in Maryland back in the 1860s and so forth. Because before public school systems in this country and so forth, only those who had means were able to educate their children and so forth. So we can't have a bifurcated educational system in this country like that. If you want to send your kid to a private school, then you pay for that.
Thank you, Mr. Stauffer. Anything under local control anyone else would like to discuss? Okay. And the last one, C, is legislative mandates should be limited and fully funded by the state. This means that we as a board would oppose new mandates through legislation, and that any new legislative mandates we would want to be fully funded by the state. Any concerns with that one? Okay. Anything else with regard to core values? Then we'll move ahead to the legislative priority. We have one. In past years, we have had several. As a priority, this initiative, which is the COVID-19 Relief Funding Assistance, would be our priority. Any questions about that? Any issues with supporting that priority? No? Okay, then we'll move on to the legislative watch list. Oh, wait, I'm sorry, getting ahead of myself. We have also, for consideration and discussion, our student member would like to bring something forth as a possible legislative priority for this legislative session. So at this time, Tanish, and we have with us our State Board of Education student member, Kevin Bokum, who I think is going to be joining our student member in this presentation of a suggested priority. Ready?
I can introduce it. I can introduce it.
Tanish, could you pull the microphone closer? It's difficult to hear.
If you don't mind, I can introduce it. I can introduce it.
It's not a one?
Yep. Good evening, President Williams, Vice President Stauffer, members of the board, Dr. Michael. Here before you is a presentation concerning student member voting rights. This is a priority that us as students have always been advocating for throughout the years. And you'll see there's multiple examples of histories of student members advocating for this. This is done in various counties. And so I'll let Tanish start the presentation.
So briefly going over a history of the student member and the Board of Education. Since 1974, the Anne Arundel County Student Board member has had full voting rights. The State Board of Education since 1994 has almost close to full voting rights. The Montgomery County Board of Education has almost full voting rights. Harford County recently in 2009, and Charles County just last year gained partial voting rights. And we are advocating for partial voting rights for the student member of Washington County. Our proposal is that the student member has voting rights on all matters except those relating to the hearings of appeals of special education placements, specified hearings relating to the superintendent's suspension and expulsion, personnel matters, appointment, salary, evaluation of the county superintendent, collective bargaining decisions, capital and operating budgets, and school closings, openings, and boundaries.
And we believe personally settling on this partial voting matter was better than expanding it like full voting rights like in Anne Arundel County and other counties do so as a great compromise, and as these voting matters would maybe in certain jurisdictions and certain people might cause them to be worried. But with these limitations in voting rights, we believe that this could pass the General Assembly and it will be supported by a lot of people and a lot of members.
But to be clear, the student member will mostly be voting on code of conduct, curriculum materials, and most importantly, Board of Education policy. And I have already gone over what the student member will not be voting on.
And so this is in contrast to other full voting jurisdictions such as Anne Arundel, Montgomery, and to extent the state board, which I'm currently on. So it presents limitations on those.
The state law currently, there's no student member established in state law. We are one of 4 counties in the state of Maryland which doesn't have this. Other counties are Kent County, Somerset County, and Wacomico County. So Washington County is really separated from other counties in the fact that the student member does not exist in state law at all. Our neighbors, full and or near full voting rights, Anne Arundel, Montgomery, and the State Board of Education, which Kevin had previously mentioned, and other counties which have partial voting rights, Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Hartford, Howard, Prince George's, and Charles County. And Charles County just got it last year. Next slide is just a map kind of showing where student members have voting rights. As you can see, it mostly is in central and southern Maryland. So Washington County would actually be the first county from the western region of Maryland which would get student member voting rights if this were to pass. Just a brief reminder of how contentious the student member election process is. Sophomores or juniors must obtain a recommendation from their teachers, student council advisor, counselor, and principal. They must hand an official letter of intent by hand or by mail to the advisor of the Washington County Association of Student Councils. They must submit biographies. They must submit a platform video. They must campaign for a month and then attend the WCAC convention and give a public speech, an extensive question and answer question. The speech will cover policies and ideas, and they'll answer questions like for leadership and values, goals, policy positions, and knowledge of issues impacting students. So the role of a student member is not something that just arrives easily. Students who are in this position work hard for it, and they are deserving, and they really do work hard for this, and it sets them above the other students, and that they represent all of the students in the county to the Board of Education.
And something to add is that student members are not like average students. They tend to be very disciplined. They tend to be really up to date on their research, and they always, throughout the years of student members within Maryland, they've instituted positive change and they've helped boards of education significantly. And also something important to mention is that with the election process, it would be up to the control of the local Board of Education to decide how that's carried out or put in place.
So why should the student member have voting rights? Well, students deserve ownership and participation of all aspects of educational decisions. Students are a large part of what makes Washington County Public Schools the public school system. And they have, well, there is a student member position on the board, but there is no real voting power for that student member. And it's all about getting the respect of the student voice from the Board of Education.
Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, questions? Dr. Zentmeyer?
When you presented this to the Regional Student Council, what were the tallies of the vote from the different schools?
Well, we have not officially presented this, but just gathering information from other, from the student council. Everybody supports it. I mean, this is generally throughout all counties in the state of Maryland. If a student member were to advocate for voting rights, I don't think there's ever been a vote where there's been even a single vote against the student member having voting
Well,
rights.
I'm talking about Washington County Regional Association of Student Councils. Obviously, you presented it to them, and they voted on their support. I was just wondering about the tally of those who voted on this particular item, and had they taken it back to their student council for support?
I don't believe there's been an official presentation of that this year, but I believe in previous year, last year, maybe years before that, there has been, and I believe that was unanimous because it has been on basically every student member that has ran for the Student Member Board of Education has supported increasing voting rights. That happening, that's obviously not happened, but every student member who's been elected has always supported that.
Okay, I would love to see the statistics, though,
Okay.
of the individual student governments and the regional student government, and some kind of position paper on how you stand as a student government.
Any other questions?
I have a question. With the counties that have granted voting rights, which now means they have even numbers, Montgomery County has 8 voting members, State Board of Education has 14 members. What happens when there's a tie vote, do you know?
Whenever there's a tie vote, there has to be a majority for that motion to pass wherever the student member can vote. So that means in a board with 7 members, now with 8 members, there need to be 5 votes for that motion to pass if that student member is allowed to vote. But for other motions that student members are not allowed to vote on, such as personnel matters or such as budget or other things like policy that concerns like staff or whatever, it'll still need to be that same majority. So still that same 4.
Anything else? Thank you for the presentation. I would like to say that I have noted that Washington County is one of 4 that does not have the student board member codified in law. I would be supportive of that. Our student member exists only by matter of county policy at this point. I would support legislation that would make it a law that the Washington County Board of Education have a student member. That said, and let me also say that I appreciate and I support and I want to hear the student voice, and I do value student perspective. However, no other stakeholder group, not parents, not teachers, not administrators, all of whom are impacted by decisions made by the board, is represented by a designated voting member of the board. So that would be something that would be particular to students. That's of concern to me. Also of concern to me is the issue of accountability. We are accountable to the voters of Washington County. Also, I wonder about the constitutionality of giving voting rights to a student. Student members can be juniors or seniors. I would think it would be rare that those students would be 18, which is the age at which a student could vote. So a student member would not be of voting age or able to hold public office. So I wonder about the constitutionality of a law that would set student members up with voting rights. I know that there's a lawsuit that has been filed by parents in Howard County questioning this, and I believe that's gone to appeals. So that would be something that I, would want to know more about. And the other concern is one that Mr. Bickford raised, which is the potential for possibility of gridlock and stalemate in the case of 8 votes. So that's another area of concern. Those are my thoughts. Anyone else like to comment?
I would just say that I would support your findings. I had some reservations also, Mrs. Williams, with this, especially what Mr. Bigford brought up about the stalemate. So I would not be in support of this at this time.
Anything else before we move ahead? Thank you again, gentlemen. Next thing to consider is the legislative watch list for 2022. We have listed there We would be watching any legislation that would fall under these categories: free and appropriate education, with the burden of proof and fee shifting, that all deals with special education primarily. We would contest any further increases in the transfer of pension costs, any changes to expand the authority of the Public School Labor Relations Board. We would be in opposition to that legislation. We would be watching any legislation that would deal with safe and secure learning environments. That, I would think, Mrs. Cade, that would, any changes to the law with regard to school resource officers would fall under that category, correct? And then also watching legislation that would deal with broadband accessibility. So those would be the categories under which bills on our watch list would fall. Is there anything additional or any questions about any of those items on the watch list?
I'm particularly concerned about the transfer of pension costs because, please correct me if I'm wrong, but years ago when the transfer was made from state to local LEAs, education agencies, the county commissioners, I think, of Washington County gave the board a $4 million payment. Is that correct?
Three something.
Okay,
Couple years
somewhere
ago.
around there. And that was a one-time payment. So what we're doing, and it's coming out of the general fund, the payment of those things. So what we're doing is, when we get an increase under maintenance of effort, in effect, we're using part of those educational dollars to pay for pension costs. To me, that's a worry, if anything more, given the funding difficulties we have here in this county. That's a big concern to me. Because to me, the fact that we still have a state pension system that's a defined benefit pension, that's one of the attractions in this world of being a teacher in this day and age, with all the problems that teachers encounter, and administrators and school employees in general, and so forth. That's one of the big selling points to being a teacher, I think, having a defined benefit pension rather than a 401k program or some other type of a pension program, whatever they may be.
Thank you, Mr. Stauffer. Anyone else?
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Trying to remember the name of the panel. I guess it's the AIB, or it's this new 7-member panel,
Yes.
Accountability Board.
the accountability board, that will have control over 25%. And will have the ability to deny us 25%?
Withhold.
Withhold.
25% of our Kerwin funding. I just noticed on here with Public School Labor Relations Board, watching any expansion of authority. Would it be appropriate to add that to this list, or are we expecting any, is that basically codified and can't be changed at this point?
That is codified, and that board is just being established. You might, in a broader sense, want to just to say that you want to be watch listing all things related to the blueprint. And that would cover that, and it would also cover any changes in timing and so forth that are going to be proposed. And we don't really know yet what people are proposing to change in the blueprint. Not a whole lot, probably, and certainly not the accountability board. But putting that as an item, clearly that is something, it's kind of included in some of these others. But I might suggest that it be listed as an item.
So you're suggesting that we add all things as a on our watch list a category that says all things related to Maryland's blueprint for the future.
I think that's really
i.e.
what we're doing, and perhaps overlook stating it quite that clearly.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions or discussion with regard to the watch list? And again, all of these core values, priorities, watch list will be formally adopted by action item at an upcoming meeting where we will be discussing the legislative program for our board. All right, the next thing on our agenda is the configuration of the legislative response team. I'm reading from Policy BJ, Roman numeral 4, under Policy Statement and Procedures number 2, the LRT, that's the acronym for the Legislative Response Team, will be comprised of the Board of Education president, at least one other board member, the superintendent, the chief legal counsel, and the designated legislative representative. In this case, that's Mrs. Ardith Cade. And in no case will more than 3 members be appointed to the LRT. Based on the, this is number 6, based on the Board of Education's legislative core values and legislative priorities, the legislative response team will take positions on proposed legislation on behalf of the board and communicate those positions to lawmakers. Communications can take whatever form or forms the members of the LRT deem to be most effective. And our work has mostly been through email and contacts that Mrs. Cade is able to make with the legislators. So at each board, this is number 7, at each business meeting, the LRT will provide a report to the Board of Education that details any positions taken on legislative proposals. So the whole purpose in having a legislative response team is to act quickly and to get the information to our legislators as to this board's position, concerns in a timely way. So currently, I serve on the legislative response team. Mr. Stauffer, our vice president, the board serves on the response team, and board member Peter Bickford currently serves on the response team. So is there anyone else who is interested? We would formalize this at our upcoming business meeting. But is there anyone who has an interest in serving on the team? No? Okay, great. So we have worked our way through to the end of the agenda. We're a little beyond our estimated stop time. Is there anything else? Any questions or any concerns with regard to legislation or the upcoming legislative session? Just a reminder that we do have a time of 9 a.m. on the day of the delegation's legislative forum. Hopeful that all who are able can attend, and we will be talking with them about these very things, our legislative program for the year. Mrs. Cade, will you be able to be with us that day?
I'm planning to be. It's November the
9th.
It's on my calendar.
All right,
Is it 9 a.m. or 7 a.m.?
9 a.m.
You can go to there's a forum at 7 you can go to, when breakfast starts at 7.
Our time with them is 9 a.m.
Okay.
But if you want to be there at 7, you do.
You're awake.
Enjoy breakfast. Okay, if there's nothing further, then we'll end this meeting. Thank you all. Thank you, staff. Thank you, Dr. Michael.